And we are recording.
All right, guys. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about a topic that we get asked a lot about. We're going to chat about all things competitive bodybuilding. It's a huge part of our lives, and we literally get asked daily about so many different aspects of the sport. Like, is it bad for you? How do I get started? What's your experience like? So we wanted to get on here and create a podcast to talk about our personal experiences, talk about common mistakes or misconceptions we see when it comes to competing, and our recommendations, and maybe answer some of the listener questions that we've got. We both have stories up on our Instagram right now, so hopefully anyone can squeeze in some last minute questions. But for now, since I am in my current bodybuilding season, I'm going to talk about my personal experience, and then Marissa will talk about hers, and then we're going to jump into we've got like maybe 10 things, 10, 12 things that we're going to talk about, just different aspects, and then recommendations, mistakes, and answer Q&As. So with that, if you haven't listened to our introduction podcast, I would recommend listening to that first so you can get more of a complete look into our backgrounds with health and fitness and how we initially got started in competing. But long story short, Marissa and I got Instagram and it just got to happen. So we just saw a lot of people that were competing, and we were drawn to the physiques and to the lifestyle. So I started following a bunch of competitors in 2014, and in 2015, I had made the decision that I wanted to start getting serious about it. And I actually had my very first coach reach out to me, and he had been liking some of my pictures, and he asked me if I had thought about competing. And I said, actually, I have, and I'm looking to compete. I had started doing research on my own, watching tons of YouTube videos and researching the topic. And he was like, well, I am coaching under Cliff Wilson and actually Brandon, Marissa's current coach. So I started asking him a bunch of questions, because that's one of the things that I had learned through doing my research, is that I need to research and I need to find a coach and make sure that that coach and his or her philosophies align with me and my values. So I started interviewing him, and I thought it would be a good fit. I had interviewed a couple other coaches, and he was the first person that I really liked and aligned with on all aspects. So we started to move forward, and we started prepping. So it happened really fast, and I didn't expect it to happen that quickly, but it did. And I did 2 shows in 2015. I did a NGA, which is a natural federation. It's the National Gym Association. And then I did my first NPC show, which was the Jay Cutler in Richmond, Virginia. I fell in love with the NPC, and I haven't looked back. It's the only federation that I've competed in since 2015. In 2016, I did 2 shows. In 2017, I did 2 regional shows and did my very first national show. And then I took time off from 2017 to now, which is 2020. I've done 3 shows. I've done 2 regional shows, and I just did a national show, how many days ago? 4 days ago? 3 days ago?
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, a couple days ago. So that's why I'm still a little orange. Actually, it doesn't really look that bad in the lighting right now.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, so I just did, this will be my second national show. I just did NPC Universe, and this year, because of the pandemic, it was moved to Charleston, South Carolina. So I flew to Florida and then drove to Charleston with my mom. It was kind of a shit show because my flights were canceled because of a hurricane. So I didn't make it to check-ins in time, and I didn't even know if I was going to be able to compete at all, but I ended up being able to compete. They were super cool. They got me my number the day of the show. Like, it was crazy. But all of the girls looked phenomenal, and it was really cool to see some of the girls who walked away with their pro cards, and some of them really deserved it, like really, really deserved it. But yeah, it was just really cool. And it's been, again, going back to the introduction episode, I didn't want to be 80 years old and look back on my life and wish I had competed. So I just went in for it and dove into it. And now here I am 5 years later, still loving it, and so glad that I decided to take that risk and do it, because I honestly can say with 100% certainty that competing has turned me into the person I am today. And I am so much more confident than when I was back in 2015 as a shy little girl. And now I know that I can do anything that I put my mind to. I just need to work hard. So competing has been the biggest, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that has shaped me into who I am.
Yeah. And I guess with that, I'll give you guys my background on competing. So I did my first show a year after Christina, roughly in 2016. And I was honestly probably only a year into seriously lifting at that point. So was it the best time for me to compete? Maybe, maybe not. But I was.
You have to start somewhere.
Yeah, and I was just head first into fitness and everything fitness and bodybuilding at this time. So again, if you didn't listen to the introduction episode, definitely gives more background on how our fitness journey started. But essentially, I was maybe a year into seriously lifting, and I was working at a gym, I was coaching online, I was doing everything under the sun related to fitness, and I was super passionate about it. So when the topic of competing came up, I figured, why not? Let's try it. And so I looked around for coaches, and I was basically scouring Instagram to see where I could find a good coach. And I was watching some YouTube videos and doing my research of influencers that I followed that were competing for maybe the first time or their first season, or just documenting their journeys. And they always recommended, again, researching coaches, making sure that you find someone who has values similar to yours. So I found a coach named Lucas. He was local to the Fairfax area, Northern Virginia, and we were able to meet in person. And he was, if it fits your macros, flexible dieting style of coach. And I went for it. So we did my first season, and it was pretty successful. I mean, I was a little twig up there, but I loved it. I love the process. For me, I think what attracted me most to the sport of competing was the competitive nature within yourself, pushing yourself to your limits and really figuring out what you're capable of on a day-to-day basis. And I was really attracted to the process, the suffering, and the mental discipline that you had to build. And it really is a character building sort of experience. And there's nothing like it. And you won't understand what that takes and the type of mental discipline that it takes, because it is literally 24/7. It's every decision that you make for months leading up to your show, which is, I think, my favorite part, because it's different than any other sport, to where you show up at practice and you give your all at practice and then you go home. It's really 100% of your lifestyle.
Yeah, it's a 24/7. You're never off.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, 2016 did my first two shows, about a month back to back, and did pretty well. I believe I got second in my open class the first show I ever did in Virginia Beach. It was the Virginia Battle Royale. It was an NPC show. And then the second show was in Laurel, Maryland, and I think I got fourth in my open class, and a bunch of, first place placings where I was the only one in the teen division and the only one in the in the collegiate division. But those are, just participation awards essentially.
I just want to say that your makeup for that show was exquisite.
Oh yeah, I wonder. Yeah, I had at Christy Lynn Fit do my makeup for that show. Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then took a year and a half off or so in 2016 to 17. And then 2018, towards the beginning of the year, started a prep. That ended up being a very arduous, difficult prep. Just had to really, really grind to get even somewhat lean enough for the stage. Competed in July when I was originally supposed to compete in early May, but I just had to keep grinding to be ready, had to keep pushing it back. And then did my first national show at North Americans in 2018, placed 13th out of 27 in class F, which was like,
gosh, you're so tall.
which is like 5.5 to 5'6.5".
Which is really not that tall, but
No.
like the fact that you're already in F class, oh my God.
For those who are listening, the classes go alphabetically. So A, B, C,
By
D,
height.
E, F by height. So literally, like, it makes me sound like a giant.
Yeah, I'm in class D, which is I think up to 5'4" or 5'4" to 5'5". I can't remember. I think it's 5'3" to 5'4".
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't competed since then. I'm working with Brandon Wattis now, and the plan is to compete in 2023 or so. So in 3 years. So got some time before then to just pack on as much muscle as possible.
Yeah. So with that, we'll kind of dive into everything that we can think of, at least when it comes to bodybuilding. So we've already both kind of touched on the number one thing, but number one thing is do your research. So again, in every single episode, we're going to talk about being active participants in your journey. So do your research. And that's not just listening to this podcast, taking in lots of people's opinions and considerations, do your research, watch YouTube videos, reach out to other competitors, reach out to coaches, go to a show before you compete. That's huge because you want to see if that's something that actually interests you, or you get there and you're like, whoop, nope, this was not for me. Yeah. But really just doing your research. And of course everyone has to start somewhere, and you're maybe not going to feel you're not ever going to feel 100% ready, and you're going to just have to launch yourself into it. But you should have a pretty decent foundation on what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah. And when it comes to doing your research, we're going to give you the most unbiased and hopefully close to what the quote unquote best advice would be. But, don't just take one person's opinion or two people's opinions as gospel. You really have to form your own opinion, and that's going to go for everything that you do in this journey. Listen to a bunch of different opinions and figure out what your truth is going to be. So if you're looking at competing, don't just listen to one person's perspective, because there's going to be a lot of different perspectives from coaches and competitors that might sway you one way or another. So you want to hear those perspectives from just different people, because you're ultimately an individual who's going to have your own individual experience. So the more you can kind of just expose yourself to other people's experiences, the better that's going to be for you. And I'm super big on the go to a show before you compete. If someone asks, what should I, how should I get started? The first thing I say is you have to attend a show. And that might be a little bit harder now with the COVID guidelines, but they do have live streams online that you can purchase and watch. But you need to see how it's run. You need to go to the show, see, where the people are walking on stage, where they're posing on the stage, what it looks like in person, because I cannot tell you, no amount of YouTube videos is going to substitute for seeing it happen live. And just the detail you see on these people and what it takes and how lean they are really stands out when you're there in person.
Absolutely. So the second thing I would start to consider is really ask yourself, what is your goal with competing? What do you want to get out of competing? Is it something that you just kind of want to just try and you have no expectations and you just want to see whether you like it or not? And then maybe that will evolve from there and you say, wow, I actually really like this. I want to continue to improve and get better. Is it a goal where I don't necessarily recommend this, but some people say, I have a goal, I'm going to lose 50 pounds and I'm going to step on stage regardless of what kind of physique I have, but it's just, that's their end goal. And that's kind of keep them accountable. So, just is it intrinsic? Is it extrinsic? Are you doing this for you? Or are you doing this for other people because you think other people are going to be impressed by your physique? really ask yourself what the goal is, and be honest with yourself, because understand that there are risks involved when you get to truly stage level of leanness. So it's not something I think that people should take lightly, but I do think you just need to ask yourself what you're looking to get out of competing.
Yeah. And when it comes to that, there's definitely, oops. Hey, Shane, cut this out. Um, when it comes to competing for weight loss, there's definitely controversial opinions on this topic in particular. Some people who are really gung-ho about competing, and they're like, you know, this is for the competitors only type of mindset. You know, they're like, hey, if you're not here to be competitive and your physique is not competitive, then you should not step on stage. And then there's other people who, you know, find it acceptable to say, hey, if you want to use this as part of your weight loss goal or the tail end of your weight loss goal, then that's awesome, that it's motivation and you want to share your story with the world. But what I do want to caution people about is if you're going to use competing as a way to lose weight,
Yes.
and that is the motivation, then you should not be competing.
Yes.
Because there's a difference between already being on that weight loss journey and wanting to take it to the next level and still sustaining that lifestyle after the competition. But if you start out, you know, overweight or obese and your goal is to compete so that you can become in shape, there is a difference there. Because being on a bodybuilding stage is so much more than being in shape. You can absolutely lose weight and be healthy and be fit and in shape without competing. And so don't get those perceptions mixed up, because like Christina said, there are risks involved. It is a very extreme sport. Your body fat should, to be competitive, get to a level that is unsustainable and is actually physiologically unhealthy for your body to sustain for long periods of time.
And not comfortable.
That should not be the goal. Yeah, it absolutely is not comfortable. And so if you are coming from a place of, I want to lose weight, so I'm going to compete, I would reevaluate that very critically.
Yes. And there are also competitors who compete different seasons because they get too far off in the off season and use prep as a way to lose weight. So even like seasoned competitors still do things like that. But one of the aspects that we wanted to touch on, which will kind of jump ahead, is what is your current relationship with food in your body? So competing will not fix your relationship with your body. So like Marissa just mentioned, if you have 40, 50 pounds to lose, competing is not going to make you love your physique. Once you get down to a certain level, you're not just now all of a sudden going to be happy with yourself. Or if you have a very skewed perception of how you look, prep might make things worse for you. And same thing with your relationship with food. If you have any sort of eating disorder, or I would even go to say disordered eating, prep is probably not a healthy thing to venture into and start. So you need to have a very healthy relationship with food. Like you're not binging, you don't have obsessive tendencies towards food, you have no binging issues, your relationship with your body. And I think you can be happy with your body and still want to change it, but you don't see yourself and say, I'm so fat, I need to compete, this is going to finally get me the body of my dreams. That just everything needs to be in a really, really good spot before you start.
Yeah. And you don't need to be perfect about, no one's body image is perfect. No one loves everything about themselves to the point where, we're just so happy and everything is blissful, right? Like
same thing with our food. I would say no one has 100% perfect relationship with food.
Yeah. It's something we're always working on. But like she said, competing is not going to fix that relationship. In most cases, it's used as a mask for a lot of people. So what we see is sometimes competitors, especially at the regional level, I tend to find that like the big gym rats tend to, especially women, will tend to diet down and compete. And then once they're done competing, they have a horrible relationship with food. So once they're in their off season, they balloon back up because they don't know how to control themselves in a normal lifestyle situation. And then once they balloon back up, they jump right back into prep as their solution. And so that is not the cycle that you want to get yourself into. And so if you don't have a foundation of a healthy, sustainable lifestyle, insert our theme here already, then competing is not going to make much sense to you, because you might just be using it as a band-aid. Because it's really easy, I will say, and we'll talk about this in the future parts of this episode, the hardest part of competing is usually not the adherence for most people. It is very easy to set your mind to a big short-term goal and push really freaking hard for it. And you can make the sacrifices, but it's about what happens after and the foundations you had before that. So really, think about how you handle food now, how you handle your relationship with yourself now. How do you speak to yourself when you look at yourself in the mirror in the morning? And analyze that before thinking about just jumping into this diet because it seems like it's going to solve all your problems. And body dysmorphia from prep is very, very real. Body dysmorphia is amplified by prep. It is not dialed down. So even though you're in the best shape of your life, competitors call this prep goggles because we see ourselves from a very, very narrow lens. And those prep goggles make us only see the flaws in ourselves, because as we're dieting down for shows, we're looking for the flaws that we need to improve to bring our best package to the stage, which is a positive thing in the context of being competitive for that show. But it's a negative thing if we're not stopping to appreciate and analyze the positives. So it can very much turn into amplified body dysmorphia very quickly if you're not careful.
So kind of to piggyback off of that, the next aspect is having a solid fitness and nutrition background. So you should already be working out anywhere from 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week. 6 is a lot I feel like for an average person, but you should already be working out, maybe have a year or 2 of muscle building under your belt. You should probably not have been trying to actively diet, especially as you get close to a show. And already have, and what we mean by a nutrition background is maybe you're tracking your food, you have a good idea of how much you are eating, you have a pretty good grasp on meal prep and what goes into food. So protein, carbs, fats, you have a very good idea and you're consistent with your numbers. So I would say having all of that is really going to set you up to be in a better position when you do start to prep.
Yeah, and there are 2 things that I really want to add on to that. So the first one is the solid workout regimen. I typically will encourage people, especially women, but just in general, bodybuilding is freaking hard. Putting on muscle takes so much time. So when someone asks me about competing, I say, well, how many years have you been lifting? And, if the answer is like less than 2, then we really have some work to do. And if someone jumps into competing, after having consistently resistance trained for 5, 6, 7, 10 years, that's a different story. But most people that come into this don't have a lot of experience. And especially the demographic that we work with, a majority of Christina and I's clients are newbies, like total newbies to the gym, total newbies to nutrition. And so these people are coming in with no muscular base. So when you diet down from there, there is no shape to the muscle at that point. And so the longer that you can spend building up muscle tissue and the longer that you can sustain that before thinking about dieting down for a show, the better. Now that's going to vary per individual, because especially not a lot of people in general can stick to a long-term goal of, say, 5 years or 10 years. Like, not a lot of people can look ahead like that. So sometimes you jump into it early. For example, I jumped into it pretty early. I was probably only a year or year and a half into seriously lifting when I started prepping. And was it ideal? No, but I knew that, but I still wanted to get my feet wet. So you have to find the balance between that. But really, the more time you can spend building muscle, the better. And then the other thing I wanted to add was the nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the population we usually work with, it's clients learning how to track macros, how to meal prep, how to develop healthy habits. And so when I get a client like that who's saying, I also want to compete, I have to make sure that person can actually adhere to their macros
Mm-hmm.
first, because we're first and foremost dealing with someone just learning how to hit them in the first place. And
Right.
so if you're still at that step, we cannot jump you into competing, because you have to be able to be consistent. So someone who has a solid nutrition regimen prior to competing, that needs to look like hitting your macros for weeks on end. That needs to look like the fact that you can actually adhere to something without the goal of competing first,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to have that solid foundation laid.
Yeah. And you made a really good point about the training aspect, that, you want to find the right balance between giving yourself time to build that foundation of muscle and shape that's going to help you on stage, but not jump right into it as a beginner. So trying to find that balance, because at the end of the day, no one is going to have that perfect shape and that perfect amount of muscle. Even the pros, even the Olympians, they are still working in the gym. But so it's trying to find that balance of actually going forward and starting, because you never know until you prep and diet down and say, okay, this is what I'm working with. These are my weak areas. This is what I need to build. So you could, after a year or two, decide to do a show, see where you actually need to improve, and then take even more time off to bring a better package the next time you step on stage. So it's kind of giving yourself time, but also not being afraid to jump in and start.
Yeah. And I'll give my example of one of the clients I had compete very recently. So when she reached out to me, it was September of 2018. And she said, hey, I want to compete. So I said, okay, let's take, that she had a very small frame. She didn't look like she had a ton of muscle or experience lifting. And she was kind of newer to the whole thing. So we took a year and agreed upon a year to build. So we took all of 2019 to build. And then we begun prep in January of this year, 2020. And because of COVID, things got pushed back, but she ended up competing mid-August. And so that was her first show ever. And that, she gave her a good amount of time to really get a lot of training under her belt. And when it comes to the training too, if you're a little bit newer, one of the biggest things that you have to learn how to work on is not just training consistently, but building mind-muscle connection, actually
Mm-hmm.
being able to contract the muscles that you're trying to target, because bodybuilding is about building shape in certain areas. And so if you're not able to connect with, say, your delts because you're doing lateral raises, but you're using your traps, then that's going to show up on stage. So you have to spend that time actually working on the art of lifting and
Mm-hmm.
connecting with your body in that manner. But yeah, so she competed in August, and then we set a goal to compete again in 2022. So she'll be taking about a year and a half off again, and then competing in 2 years.
Mm-hmm. So next up is kind of just everything that we've talked about already, is just understanding that competing is going to be hard. It's definitely not easy, and you need to be, again, in a good spot mentally and physically to start a prep. So this kind of goes back to the podcast episode where we talked about dieting mistakes and being in a good position to start a diet, being in a good position to start a prep. If you are currently doing 30 to 45 minutes of cardio a day and you're eating 1,200 calories, you're not going to be in a good in a good place to start a prep, and you're going to make it that much harder on yourself. Can you do it? Maybe, but you're going to be miserable. So just understand that competing is going to be hard. So the other thing, and again, I feel like everything relates back to the dieting, common dieting mistakes, but you are going to feel hungry. that is going to be normal. You are going to probably feel run down. Running errands will be hard. Getting up and walking to do something will be hard. You're going to be tired. You're going to be irritable. And it's going to be a little bit selfish at some point. So it's going to get hard. You might even want to quit. Don't give up. But these are all normal aspects of prep.
Yeah. I will tell you right now, I live on the third floor of my apartment complex, and prepping and bringing groceries up the stairs during prep was the worst thing I have ever experienced. It might be the hardest part. It's not actually the hardest part, but like I would legitimately sit in my car with my groceries in the back seat for like 10 minutes, like stalling and like building up the energy to grab the groceries and drag them up the stairs. And then I would get up the stairs and I would be winded and just like,
oh my gosh,
so much worse than like, yeah, everyone walks up the stairs and they're like, oh, I'm out of shape. But like, this is a whole new level. And just like walking through the grocery store and just dragging my feet. I remember when I was in peak week for 2018, I went to the mall, which is down the street from where I live, to go get my eyebrows threaded to like just have them looking right for the show. And just walking through the mall, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to be here. And as soon as I sat in the chair for the service, I was like, ah, yes, this is so much better. I was like, legitimately, when you feel that way, you know you're getting close.
Yeah.
And you know, this isn't to dissuade you from competing.
This is just the realities of it.
We love competing. Like,
yes.
We sound like psychos because we like feeling terrible and suffering and pushing ourselves. But there's a beauty that comes with competing that I'm sure we'll touch on multiple times in this episode, of just self-discovery and character building and just learning what you're capable of. But it comes with that just day-to-day, the hunger, the exhaustion, crying at the gym. I can't tell you the number of times that I've like finished one of my last cardio sessions before a show and have just like lost it in the middle of the gym because I did it, or like I made it almost all the way there.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because when I first think about like the hard times of prep, it does revolve around grocery shopping. I just remember having to go, and it's like not even having to go get like a million items. It's just like a couple things. And I just remember sitting in my car trying to hype myself up to get the energy to walk inside and just get some stuff. And it's just hard.
Yeah. So understand that it'll be hard. Understand that it's going to take more discipline than you have ever exerted in probably your entire life. I can't say another situation where I've had to consistently exert that much discipline in my day-to-day life ever before.
Yeah. So the next aspect to consider is there are a lot of different divisions, and that is divisions for men and divisions for female, and finding the right division for you. And a lot of this comes down to also taking in other people's considerations. And you might even do what is called a crossover, where, for let's say if I took myself for example, I compete in the bikini division, but maybe if I was unsure, I could do a crossover and compete in something like wellness or figure, and get judges' feedback and hear what they critique and say, you know what, you don't have enough size for wellness or figure, you should stick with bikini, or your shoulders are extremely broad, maybe you should try wellness and figure. But at the end of the day, you also need to find the division for you and what's going to make you happy. Because if you're competing in figure and you don't like being that big, you don't like that amount of muscle mass you have to put on, and you're competing to make other people happy, well, you're not going to have a happy competition life. You're just always going to be doing that to make other people happy. So for men, there's physique, classic, and bodybuilding. So we're starting from the lowest amount of muscle to the largest. And for females, we have bikini, wellness, figure, fitness, and women's physique. And there's no longer bodybuilding?
Not in the NPC. They got rid of it.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. So women's physique is the biggest division. So again, going from the smallest to the biggest, or the most amount of muscle. And each division has different criteria that they are looking for. And you can find that criteria on whatever federation you are looking to compete in. So when we talk, we're both familiar and have experiences with the NPC. So that's generally what we are going to be touching on and talking about whenever we talk about competing. That is just our area of expertise and experience.
Yeah, and I guess to give you guys the background on what the NPC is and the different federations, and then going into that, the differences between the divisions and the federations, etc. So the NPC is the National Physique Committee. It is the most prominent organization for competitions in the US, and it feeds into the IFBB. So when you go pro in the NPC, you become a part of the IFBB, which is the International Federation of Bodybuilding. And the NPC and IFBB are untested, meaning that you can take anabolic steroids to compete in those divisions. All of the other federations that I'm aware of are tested. And so those include things like the OCB, the NGA, the WNBF, the WBFF, the W everything, like literally every alphabet character.
WBFF is tested?
Is it not?
I don't think so.
Is that the one in Australia?
It's bigger in Australia, but I don't think the WBFF is tested.
Okay, scratch that. The NGA, the IPE, and
OCB.
there are like a billion different natural federations. I'm not the biggest expert on those, but I can tell you that the OCB is one of the larger ones, and the IPE is one of the largest pro federations. And the INBF is one of the larger pro federations. They just hosted the Natural Olympia, they call it, last weekend. So there's a bunch of different natural organizations. They all test differently for drugs. So some of them will do P-tests, some of them will do polygraphs, some of them will do mixtures of those. And it depends on the organization on who they're testing. So some organizations will only test the top 3 or 5. Some organizations will randomly test and take you at your word. And other organizations will test everyone. It just depends on who is running it. And a lot of the different natural federations will feed into larger, more comprehensive pro organizations. But essentially, you can look up different natural or not natural federations in your area to see what kind of shows are going on. So when it comes to deciding between those and deciding between your divisions, essentially what you're going to find is the natural organizations are going to be a little bit less muscular, hard defined, vascular overall across divisions, but that doesn't mean necessarily that they're less competitive. They're just competitive in different ways. So for example, if you're an enhanced athlete competing in bodybuilding, the guys are just going to be huge. They're going to be running a lot of different drugs, and they're going to be unnaturally large. But if you're doing men's bodybuilding in a natural organization, everything is going to be more attainable. And so you're going to have some freaks out there. You're going to have some genetic anomalies, and the dudes are going to be still really freaking big, but it's going to be naturally attainable. And same goes for the female divisions as well.
So I have experience with the NGA. It was one of my first shows. And again, it was in 2015. So I'm sure a lot has changed since then. So I'm only speaking on that one show that I did. But I had to take a polygraph in order for me to enter into the show. So I was never drug tested. I placed second at the show, but I was never drug tested. I think the winners were, but you had to take a polygraph. And it's hilarious because even though I have never done any sort of steroid or anything, I was like texting my coach, "Oh my God, is this fat burner like gonna like?" And he was like, "No." And I felt guilty taking the polygraph, even though I'd never done anything, but just because I had never had that experience before. But one of the reasons that I ended up following through with the NPC over the NGA or another natural federation is, like Marissa had just said, is it's generally you're competing with a higher caliber athlete, in my opinion. And even though I don't use any steroids, I want to still compete with kind of the best of the best. And the NPC IFBB has a very prestigious, what's the word I'm looking for? Reputation within the fitness industry. And for the NGA show, it was my very, very, very first show I had ever done. And I blacked out on stage. I really don't even remember what I did. My teeth were chattering. Like, it was the most horrific experience I ever had. Like, it was so bad. And I don't know why I continued on with it, because I was like, that was awful. But I placed second, and I was one spot away from earning my NGA pro card. And I just thought, I was like, that's silly to me that I could go up on stage, not know anything that I was doing, not feel comfortable, and almost walk away as a pro. So for me, I went to my second show, which was the NPC show. And not only that, it was just so much smoother. It was so much more well run and organized. And I just had more fun up on stage. And maybe it had a little bit to do with it being my second show, but I just felt like the whole show day experience was so much better with the NPC. So that's why I continued on with them. But there are a lot of people who love the natural federations and would never dream of going to the NPC. So it's just finding out what is going to fit you in your competition career.
Yeah, I will say, even though I've only actually competed in the NPC, I've attended a lot of natural shows, specifically the OCB Yorton Cup, which is an amateur and pro show local to this area. I really liked just the experience of being there. It was very homey, and it was a large show and super competitive, but it was really cool to see that one run. So I can definitely vouch for that. I can definitely vouch for the OCB in that sense. And I had two competitors actually compete at an NGA show in 2018. And from what I could tell, it was pretty well run. Nothing really stuck out to me as being disorganized. So maybe they've kind of improved over time. But
yeah, and I'm sure they have. And it was a very small show as opposed to the Yorton Cup.
Yeah, but that NGA show as well was very, very small as well. One of my competitors did place second as well. And so she was one place away from earning her pro card as well. So in natural organizations, in federations, it can be easier to earn your pro card depending on which one you're going for. A lot of times the natural federations will have their first place winner or their overall at a regional level show earn their pro card. So depending on the federation, it can be more or less competitive to earn the pro card.
And I think too, you don't have to compete in the NPC or IFBB and use steroids. I think that is a common misconception, that you can still do very well within those federations and not be enhanced. It's just your choice. And so they actually do have natural shows within the NPC. So I think that Ben Wilder, am I saying that right?
Yes, I think so.
So they have a show that's in Canada, right? And that's a natural show. And I think they have a couple, and I don't know if that's just becoming more of a thing now, but you still can compete naturally within the NPC and IFBB.
Yeah, that's relatively new as well as the natural shows, which is really exciting. But yeah, I think that's really it on that.
So another aspect to consider for competing is, we talk about being in a good spot mentally and physically, but being in a good spot financially to start competing, because there are a lot of costs that are associated with competing, like a lot.
It will literally hit you upside the head if you're not prepared for it.
Yes. So there are a lot of things to consider. So for females, your suit is going to be anywhere from a couple $100 to $1,000. If you are just getting into the sport, I don't recommend spending $1,000 on your first suit. For guys, your trunks, maybe, or your Speedo, I don't know what they call them.
Yeah. Boxer briefs, Speedos.
Yeah. So whatever that, your bottoms, those are going to cost not anywhere as much as females in their suits. You're going to have to pay for a tan. If you're female, your hair and your makeup. Some guys actually do stage makeup as well. a gym membership. You're going to pay for a coach, travel and accommodations to the show, posing coach, your heels, your accessories, your jewelry, all of your food and groceries, spending money on supplements each month. And then there are show fees and membership cards. So whether you're in the OCB, NGA, WBFF, MPC, IFBB, there's going to be a membership fee. You need to purchase a membership card that allows you to compete for that year, as well as any and all show fees. So depending on how many divisions you're going to compete in. If you're, like Marissa had mentioned earlier, if you're going to compete in true novice, collegiate, open, teen, like first responders, you can compete in a lot of different divisions. Or if you're doing a crossover, if you're doing bikini and then you also want to do wellness or figure, you pay a crossover fee. So you can spend hundreds. You could even spend $1,000 at one show just in fees alone.
Yeah. So to put some numbers on it for you guys, the membership for the NPC, I believe, is what, $120 for the year?
Yeah.
And then there's show fees of, usually it's $100 per class. So if you compete in the open division, it's $100, then add on novice, $100, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And
some will give you a discount. So like my last regional show was $120, and then each additional class or division was $70. So it just varies.
So like $10 off
yeah.
a little bit. But yeah, so that adds up super quickly. What I will say is natural organizations tend to be a lot cheaper in that sense. So the registration costs and the show fees do go down for that. But that doesn't get rid of the fees for the hair, the makeup, this tan, and the suit. So to put some numbers on the tan, I believe it's $130 to book your tan for under the NPC in most circumstances that I can remember from my own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And then hair and makeup, if you're a woman listening to this, you can probably imagine, $100 for hair, $100 for makeup, or combination price $175 for both. So that can be a lot. So learning to do your own there can save you a lot of money. And then just if you're gonna stay at the host hotel for the show, or if you're gonna Airbnb, like that's gonna make a difference in the amount that you spend as well. But yeah.
So by the time this comes out, I have an ebook and I'm planning on revamping it, and it's all about the costs associated with competing. So kind of like the most expensive, the least expensive, and then trying to meet somewhere in the middle. And then what I recommend splurging on, and some things that you can do yourself. So a lot of competition tan companies, they have DIY kits. And so you can save hundreds of dollars, probably thousands a season on just doing your own tan and things like that. So by the time this episode comes out, if you want to go to my website, it's ChristyLynFit.com. I will have that ebook available, and it goes, it's pages and pages worth of everything. We go into everything. Yeah. So that'll break down the costs and give you a better idea if you are seriously considering competing.
Yeah. And what I will say about it too, I think two things to finish off on the costs. The first thing that I tell people in terms of how much money you need to have saved up in general for your season, I say, let's save at least $1,500 to $2,000 for one, regional show and the costs associated with just that alone. And that's going to give you a good amount of cushion, because if you end up saving money in different places, then you're not going to be spending all of that. Mm-hmm. But I think at a max, if you put away $2,000 for a season for just those show fees, just for the hair, makeup, tan, suit, those sorts of things, if you're going to just go all in and not really think about making those concessions for your budget, that might be what you need to put away for it. So I tell clients who are interested in competing, that's kind of, rough range of what you need to be putting away. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that I tell competitors a lot for their first show is I've never done a DIY tan myself, but I do recommend, just if you are worried about messing it up, just get it done by the promoter for that sake of convenience the first time.
Your first time, definitely.
Yeah, because it's just easier, and they'll do it for you. They'll always touch it up for you, and you will have access to the people backstage who will touch it up for you,
And you'll
complimentary.
also understand how dark you actually need to be, because
Yes.
chances are if you were to do it yourself the first time, you wouldn't go dark enough.
Yeah, it needs to be so dark, and so
Mm-hmm.
many layers if you're fair skinned. So those are the two things that I'll tell a first time competitor
Mm-hmm.
is put that money away. And I would say, let's get you the tan from the show promoter the first time around.
The other thing I will mention is typically your first season of competing is going to be your most expensive, because you have a lot of upfront costs that you may not have to spend in the future. For example, if you do decide to splurge and get yourself a nice suit, that is something that you can carry with you from season to season. And then the other thing too, like myself, I kind of learned as I went, and I am now comfortable doing my own hair and makeup. I do my own tan. So all of those things save me money, but it's not something I would have done my very first season, just because I needed to get acclimated with competing and how everything worked. So, and same thing with your heels, like all of those are going to be those upfront fees that you can carry with you into your future seasons.
Yeah, definitely. Or if you're my client, you know that I allow my clients to borrow some of my stuff too. So I had
Yeah.
my last client wore my most recent suit for her show, and it looked great on her. We're the same height.
Yeah.
Worked out really, really nicely.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
The next thing to kind of consider, and this is something I think is really important for people, I guess just it doesn't matter. It's just important for everyone. Realizing that at some point in your prep, it's going to be extremely selfish, and it is going to take over your life for a period of time. But I think it's very important that it doesn't take over your entire life for the entire duration of your prep, or just the rest of your life in general, that there's some give and take, and it's not always about you, but eventually realizing that it is going to be all about you, if that makes sense. Maybe Marissa can explain that a little bit better than I can.
Yeah, so when it comes down to it, when it comes down to the wire in terms of timeline, so if you're a month out from your show, or 2 weeks out from your show, 3 weeks, you're going to have to be making some concessions, like taking some time off from work. You're probably going to have to, use some PTO for that, or, whatever it is that you do for a living. You're probably going to have conversations with your loved ones saying, like, this is what I'm going to be putting first for, the last stretch towards the show, because it's just taking that additional sacrifice. And I think, it's very selfish, and then having that communication is really, really key. So seeing if you can have a productive conversation with your loved ones, and whether it's your significant other or your family, and saying, like, hey, this is what I'm expecting to have to do for the duration of this prep, and how that timeline is going to go. I would love if you supported me through it. And, if I'm ever snapping back at you, or getting moody or cranky because I'm hungry, like, please let me know, because I want to be better about that. And what I like to think about is, yes, prep is going to take away from certain areas of your life. It's going to take away from your ability to fully maybe experience a social event, or to fully engage in things that maybe you would otherwise do, that are revolving around food or drink, or things that take away energy from training or nutrition. But for a certain period of time, that's what you're going to have to be putting first, is your meals, your cardio sessions, your training sessions, and you're not going to be able to miss any of those. And so that is a selfish aspect of it. But educating the people around you, not in like a totalitarian way, but, hey, this is going to be my priority, and it's temporary. It's not something that I'm going to be putting first and before you forever. You are still extremely important to me. And if, like, let's say family emergency or something like that happens, prep shouldn't come before that.
No.
Prep is still just an aspect of life that we're adding on to our lives and adding on to our character by doing. But true life priorities, family emergencies, events like that, and the things that are foundational to who you are going to come before that. But on a surface level, you're going to have to be putting your priorities for prep first. So hopefully I did that a little bit more justice.
Yeah. And Marissa, you actually just reminded me of something. So again, going back to my first season of competing in 2015, my tia Lola passed away, which is my grandmother's sister. And it was a couple days before I was going to start peak week. And this was of my very first show. And I was like, I can't fly. I can't get on a plane and fly and have to worry about my food and all this. Like, I can't go to her funeral. And my mom just looked at me and she was like, you would regret that the rest of your life. She was like, you need to go. You need to find a way to go. And, of course, deaths in the family, they oftentimes happen very unexpected. And so it's not like I knew this was going to happen and I was, of course, devastated. And I found I prepped all of my food. I had to bring extra food, because I didn't know what my coach was going to give me for peak week macros. Sorry if you hear any yard work in the background right now. They're doing that at my mom's house. But I had to, make it work, and I was able to kind of arrange my trip to be 24 hours, and I was able to come home. But looking back on it now, like, you're just so into prep at that moment that you don't see things clearly. And I am 100% right with my mom. Like, I would have regretted that for the rest of my life. So and again, this is something that kind of the big takeaway that I guess kind of fits right now is Sandy Williamson is one of the biggest names in our sport, especially for bikini girls. And seminar after seminar, she always talks about how, like, her biggest piece of advice is revolve competing around your life, not your life around competing. So if I had to go to, the funeral and maybe push a show back, then so be it. It's a couple extra weeks. Would it have sucked? Yeah, but it would have sucked less to have made it to her funeral. That's what matters more. So it's very, very hard sometimes when you're in the zone and you're in the prep and that's all you can see because it's everything that you think about. But at the end of the day, life comes first.
Yeah. And Sandy Williamson is one of the judges for the NPC bikini division, right?
Yeah. So kind of like she was saying is that prep in the beginning should kind of be easy, that you're already meal prepping, you're already tracking your food, you're already going to the gym, maybe you're doing a little bit of cardio here and there. And it's really not any really different than what it shouldn't be really anything different than what you're normally doing. Just being way more consistent, way more on point, but nothing really should change that much. Maybe, you're looking into competing and you're looking up shows and maybe you're practicing some posing, you've hired a coach. So that'll be a little bit different, but it's not until you're doing maybe an hour of cardio a day. You're having to get up in the morning. You're having to rearrange your schedule. If you have kids, you have to get up at 4:30 in the morning to do your cardio, or, you have to start making a lot of sacrifices. And so prep does get extremely selfish because you can't miss cardio. You can't miss your workouts. You can't miss meal prep. You have to do all those things. And sometimes you end up staying up late by yourself, having to cook and weigh all your meals. And that's just something that you have to do. So it does get selfish, but like what Marissa was saying, it's generally only hopefully for a short period of time, and being able to communicate that to the people around you.
Yeah, definitely. And shorter period of time, not,
Hopefully.
It's not just a couple of weeks. Like, prep ultimately can be a grind for multiple months at a time. And it just really depends on the person and the person's journey. But, expect to just have to make those sacrifices, expect to have to work things around it. But, like she said, like Christina said, work competing around your life, not your life around competing. And that's like one of the biggest takeaways that I'll say about fitness in general too. Like, we love to be gung-ho about our journeys. We love to be all in with our fitness. And if we're not careful, we can let that take over our life and be detrimental to our personal relationships, our friendships, and things like that. So that's not what we want to have happen. And one person that's actually really good about prepping and still living life as normal is my coach, Brandon. He's very, very adamant about not allowing prep to change him or change his life. So he will essentially, you know, just try his best to not be more moody because he's hungry, or you know, not complain about prep or talk about prep more than he needs to, because ultimately it's
just a lifestyle kind of.
This is something that I tell people a lot, clients and competitors. It's a privilege to be able to manipulate our own diet to lose weight. It's a privilege to be able to have extra time to do cardio. It's a privilege to be able to choose this sport. You know, aside from the finances, that's a privilege alone. Like, just the lifestyle that we choose to do that for 4, 5, 6 months for a prep for a show. It is a true privilege. So if you were sitting there deciding to complain about it, and this will be a really good segue into the next point, if your mindset about prep is, I'm going to be miserable and I'm going to hate this, you know, that's how it's going to end up. But ultimately, you're choosing to do it to yourself. So why be negative about it?
Yeah. I mean, and it's kind of like, I relate this a lot to my coworkers, and when I'm at work, I don't really want my coworkers to know whether I'm in prep or whether I'm not. Obviously, like when I start to lose weight and I get to a point where I'm stage lean, it's very noticeable, but I always carry around a gallon of water, in season or not. I always bring meals. There are maybe a couple days a week where I'll go out and grab Chipotle or something like that. But I would say 95% of the time I have my own meals with me. Everyone knows to ask whether I can have something or not. And so they just know that that's me and my lifestyle. And it doesn't matter if I'm in prep or if I'm not, but that's just me. And that's how I live my life. So kind of that, just, it's always a lifestyle, and you just continue to build on those healthy habits.
Yeah. And that's super important. It goes back to the first thing that we were saying, that your habits should already be there. So for example, I haven't been in prep since I've been in a relationship with Aaron, but his whole family knows to ask, you know, hey, would you want to eat this? Or, you know,
can you eat this? And
sometimes, and sometimes, like when I go down to his parents for a weekend, it's just a little bit harder to stay on track when you're on the go. So sometimes I'll bring my food scale and I'll be weighing out something just so that I can moderate myself. And they'll be like, oh, you're so dedicated. You watching your fat and your carbs or whatever, you know, like people's perceptions of tracking macros is funny, but they know that that's me, right? And people understand that's my lifestyle. And in general, the encounters I have and the conversations I have, people know to basically consider that as a part of the picture. And so if that's not already a part of who you are, make sure those habits are set before you start thinking about competing at that next level, because it really is the next level, not only on the stage, but just in everyday life.
Yeah. So with that, I think we can transition into talking about some of the biggest mistakes we make, or that we've made or see. And again, sorry, landscaping is out and about right now. But again, biggest mistakes either that we've made or we see other people make when it comes to competing. So we just kind of touched on that negative mindset versus a positive mindset. So it really is how you interpret things, thinking it like, I have to do my cardio versus I get to do this, because no one is forcing you to compete. You can pull out at any time you want to. No one is making you do this. So I have to do this versus I get to do this. It can make such a huge difference in just how you perceive everything. Like, I have this body that allows me to do this incredible thing versus like, you know, I don't want to do this, you know, but no one's forcing you.
Yeah, or I don't want to eat a salad again, or vegetables, or chicken breast. Like ultimately, you're doing it to yourself, bro. So
Yeah. And so the other thing, again, talking about the it being like a selfish thing, I kind of equate this because it was hard for me in the beginning. Like, let's say you're in prep, and I feel like this is a lot more for maybe, I don't know, younger kids. But, maybe you're in college and you're in prep and your friends want to go out. And so you're either out at a bar, or you're out at a party, and you have to drink water with lemon, or, club soda with lemon, and everyone else is drinking alcohol. And instead of being miserable the whole time thinking about this sucks, I can't drink with them, I can't party, like, you're still there, you're still out with your friends, try to have a good time as best you can. Maybe, you're just the DD. Like, my friends know when I'm in prep, I DD. I don't care. I love to still go out and have a good time with my friends, and I could care less if I'm the DD for 6 months out of the year. I'm like, hey, that takes off from someone else not having to drink. Like, I get to pick up and I get to do that for everyone. So it's just the mindset that you have and how you perceive things. So it doesn't matter if what you're eating is different than everyone else, or focusing on the food that you can't eat. Focus on what you can control and still try to be as present as possible in the moment.
yeah, I mean, heck, I'm DD year round.
Yeah.
I just don't love drinking, but I mean, that's really just me. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, and I'll voluntarily DD year round, and prep is just like an easier way to do that. But
Yeah.
for sure. Another mistake that I think a lot of people make is not being engaged, like we've talked about with the process. So, not just the research up front, but throughout the entire thing, knowing why you're doing certain things, why you're taking certain supplements, what they do, why you're eating certain macros, certain types of foods. So depending on the coach that you have, they might say, hey, have a pomegranate and egg whites for breakfast, and chicken breast and spinach for lunch. And, you should ask why about those things. And some, different coaching methodologies will tell you to do certain different things. So you might have a set of macros, you might have a meal plan, but understand why, and, have a holistic view of what your whole plan is actually doing physiologically. And like, you don't have to get your bachelor's degree in kinesiology to know these things, but just like understand what is actually going on so that you can understand what the process is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, let's say you do ask your coach, hey, why do you have me on a meal plan? Or why do you have me doing fasted cardio in the morning? Why am I doing this? And they say, because I said so. Well, that doesn't help you learn anything, and you should probably look for a new coach. At some point, you do have to kind of trust what they say. So you shouldn't feel like you are constantly second guessing your coach, or you don't agree with them, or you don't align with all of their philosophies. You should trust them to an extent, but if they're telling you to take a supplement, well, what is that supplement? Why are you having me take this? What is it going to do? How is it going to benefit me? So still making sure that you're asking questions and you're learning, but make sure you're also getting the correct feedback. Like, if you don't want to, and find out after your prep that you were taking Anavar, or you were taking clenbuterol and you didn't realize that you were taking a steroid. So it's really, really important that you were trying to be active within the prep itself, but also trust your coach. So again, that kind of that dichotomy between the two.
Yeah, basically being a student of the sport, and
Yeah.
making sure that you're engaged in it. And usually people are pretty good about this, because if you're getting involved in competing, most of the time, you're pretty well involved in all of this. And so you want to know more, but you just wanted to make sure to put that on the list, because sometimes people will blindly go into it, out of ambition to lose weight, like we talked about, or other things like that, or their boyfriend said they should compete, so they did, that sort of thing. So just being a student of the sport.
The next mistake that we see, and we've talked about this before, is not really loving the physique that you're building. So you're building a physique for the judges and not for you. So again, this kind of goes back to the division. If you have judges that tell you that you're going to be better suited for figure, but you don't like that look, stay in bikini. And, you know, because that's the physique that you want, because at the end of the day, you live in your body and you're with your body for your entire life. And the judges see you for 20 seconds on stage. And so you need to make sure that you're happy with the physique that you're building and you're training the way you want to train. And sometimes you might, you know, for bikini girls, we most of the time don't really need to really do a whole lot of quad work. But let's say you love going ham in the gym. Well, then maybe figure is for you. So it's just trying to find where you feel like you were going to be the most happy, what you're going to like training for. And, you know, if you get on stage and you don't want to build your shoulders anymore, and that's what the judges are telling you, well, then maybe have an understanding of maybe I won't go as far as I would like to in the sport, but I'm happy with how I look when I step on stage.
Yeah. And then to kind of bring this even bigger picture, you know, if you take the judges' words and their judges' feedback as gospel, there's going to be some serious issues down the road with just deriving your self-worth from others instead of from yourself. And that's really what this comes down to, is if what the judges say is everything to you and you have to have their constant approval, you're going to be chasing like a slice of pizza in front of you on a treadmill forever.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is going to be the most frustrating race, because the judges will always have feedback for you to improve. So you have to be enjoying the process of how you already look, what your body is capable of genetically, and not just striving for what their standard is, because you should have standards for yourself and you should appreciate where you are already, even if you are working towards a higher standard in general.
And then the other thing I would point out, and this is something that you see, and this is something that I have personal experience with, is you could win a show. You could win the overall, and the judges tell you that you look perfect. And then you go into another regional show or, you know, or nationals, and you get last call outs. And they don't like your look. And maybe they tell you you're too muscular, or you too little, you need to grow this, you need to bring this down. So each judging panel might give you different feedback. So it's trying to accumulate all of the feedback and try to become a more well-rounded competitor. But your physique may not be the judge's cup of tea that day. You could do a next show somewhere else and they love it. So that's why it is still important to build for you versus judges, because you want to build the look that you're going to be happy with and that you like looking at in the mirror.
Yeah. So the next mistake that we touched on actually a lot in the dieting mistakes episode. So if you haven't listened to that, shameless plug, go listen to that one, because we go way into the weeds with it. But not paying attention to NEAT, which is an abbreviation for non-exercise activity thermogenesis, otherwise known as non-exercise activity. So, you know, walking up the stairs, doing chores,
with your groceries.
Yes. And, you know, not paying attention to that. This is one of the biggest mistakes I think I made in the 2018 prep season that I had. And I think it was the reason that my prep was dragged out for so long and why it was so hard. I'm not going to disclose necessarily how much cardio I was doing, but I was doing a ridiculous amount. But let me tell you what I was doing the other hours of the day. I was sitting on my ass and I wasn't moving. I was being a sloth and just, you know, conserving energy wherever I could. So what that does is it basically negates the effect of that cardio. So what I could have done in that situation is gotten something like a Fitbit or a step tracker and seen what my total daily steps were with that cardio. I could have actually just probably matched those number of steps, doing things around the house, not letting my room become a pile of trash. And, you know, keeping something like that with non-exercise activity constant, rather than having to do a ton of cardio. So depending on the person, of course, you're going to have to push, you're going to have to do lots of cardio to shave off those last couple of pounds. But a lot of times paying attention to that non-exercise activity can be the key to breaking through a plateau, because usually what happens is, I'll give you a random example. Let's say I need to hit, 20,000 steps per day to lose the weight that I need for stage. And that's not an unreasonable number based on how much cardio I was doing. But let's say I'm doing an hour of cardio a day and I'm doing 10,000 steps elsewhere, and that gets me the 20,000. That's great. But then maybe we cut food down and I get more tired and I stop moving outside of that hour-long cardio session. My steps go down to 15,000, 12,000, and I'm not moving outside of that cardio session. That's when we have to add that back in to match for the steps. So is it metabolic adaptation? Maybe not. Maybe it's just, we start to compensate our energy in other areas outside of the gym, because like we said, it's a 24-hour commitment every single day. So everything really does go into it. So keeping steps, paying attention to that, keeping it kind of constant can be a really big game changer. And I think if I had that variable in mind in 2018, I probably would not had quote unquote suffered doing cardio quite as much.
Yeah, I am in the same boat.
Yeah. At least now you have a step counter though.
This is true. I actually just took it off to charge right now because I was like, oh, I need to charge my watch.
Yeah.
I would say another mistake is not giving yourself enough time to prep or not having an accurate timeline. So this is true for a lot of new competitors, but even seasoned vets like us, sometimes we just don't account for the actual amount of time it takes to lose weight. And so we talk about this again, going back to common dieting mistakes. We think it's going to be a lot easier to lose weight than it actually is. Even if we do everything 100% correct, 120%, sometimes you just aren't going to lose weight and you're going to plateau and you need to push past. And so sometimes the clients will come and they say, hey, I want to do a 12-week prep, and they don't want to hear that it might take 24 weeks. They don't want to hear that. They want to be able to do it now. I want to do it now. I want to do this show. And sometimes you kind of have to adjust your timeline a little bit or give yourself a little bit more wiggle room. And typically longer preps are going to be the results are more sustainable over time, which we really like. And you're going to have an easier time to incorporate maybe diet breaks or refeeds and give yourself a little bit more time than constantly racing the clock to get ready. And if you can reverse into a show as opposed to diet into a show, you're going to feel better. You're generally going to look better on stage. You're going to feel more full. You're probably going to be harder compared to other people who look stringy on stage. So there are a lot of benefits to having a longer prep versus a shorter one.
Yeah. And so with that, reversing into a show, some context for you guys. If you don't know what that is just raising your daily calories as you approach the show, because of course you're going to be in a calorie deficit for most of your prep. But if you get lean enough and you can start adding food back in towards the end of that prep, towards the show, it's basically going to fill up your muscle stores, make you feel fuller, and make those muscles, I guess, pop more on stage and become more defined. And the other thing with that too is the faster you go with your prep, the more lean mass you're putting at risk to lose. So physiologically, faster weight loss is not better weight loss, because your body, when it feels, not saying your body has a personality, but typically it tends to work out in a way that when your body, quote unquote, feels safer or feels like things are less extreme, it's going to let go of fat a little bit easier and keep holding on to muscle. But the faster that you diet, the more you put yourself into a catabolic state, meaning muscle breaking down and losing mass on your body. The more lean mass you can lose, and thus the more shape you can lose. You can atrophy, you can lose the shape that you've been working so hard to build. So, really a 20, 30 week prep is not out of the question for most people. And when we're looking at a timeline, I tend to tell clients and tell people that are looking at competing, give yourself a window that's roughly anywhere from 20 to 30 weeks of the shows that you're kind of going to try to target. And as you get closer, you can make a decision on which shows in that time frame you should be doing.
Yeah, So the next mistake we have is comparing yourself to others, or I would say also kind of constantly looking at your competition. So that's just going to mess with your head. You're going to constantly say, I'm not lean enough. I'm not big enough. They have bigger this, they have smaller that. They have and you can only control what you bring to the stage. You can only control your posing. You cannot control who shows up. So at the end of the day, you're going to waste so much time and just need to focus the energy and channel that into yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have much to add there.
Yeah.
Really
It's
just focus on
it's
you.
just going to make you more anxious, and looking at the hashtags of your show and all the tag pictures and oh, what class is she in? Don't spend time. Just focus on yourself, because you cannot control what they do. You can only control yourself.
Yeah.
So the next thing we have, again, we kind of already touched on this, but we'll mention it again, is being selfish all the time versus when you actually need to be. So, there's a time and place where you do need to be selfish, but your prep doesn't have to be all about you all the time. It shouldn't be everything that you talk about. It might be, what's on your mind, but you don't need to bring it up every single time that you open your mouth or talk to someone. To focus on other people, because life still revolves around other people and not just you. So just there's that time and place, but you don't have to be the center of attention all the time.
Yeah. And it's gonna feel like it does revolve around you when you're in it,
Mm-hmm.
because that's all you're thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
But be really mindful about that when you're deep
Mm-hmm.
into a prep. Like, just remember to ask about how other people are doing, what they're
Mm-hmm.
up to. And a way that you can gauge it for yourself is ask yourself, oh, what's this friend been doing? If you don't know, it's time to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of take inventory on the people around you and making sure that you're checking in on them too, because
Mm-hmm.
again, it's not all about you. And those people that you do check in on and that you are there for throughout your prep are the ones that are going to show up at your show and cheer you on.
Yeah. The next piece of our biggest mistakes that we see is not spending enough time on posing. You can really tell who is a beginner or a novice versus someone who's more of a seasoned vet or someone who has taken that time. Both Marissa and I, posing does not come naturally to us. We, especially our first few seasons, we were super awkward. It just, you feel like you spend enough time on posing, and then you watch videos of yourself on stage and you're like, huh, that's how that looks. Okay. So when you think you've spent enough time posing, do some more posing. Probably invest in a posing coach, because your stage presence, especially for bikini, maybe not so much other federations, but really plays a big role in how you place. And a lot of times what people don't understand with posing is you can pose to hide your flaws in your physique, and you can pose to accentuate the good aspects of your physique. So that's why posing can be really important and actually help you present yourself better on stage to the judges.
Yeah, I remember I like to think I have a pretty keen eye for posing. But when the last show that I watched was Christina's regional show that was streamed online, and we were looking at it on the computer, and we would see a woman walk out, and she was walking fine in her heels. And I would see just them walking, like not really posing, but kind of just holding things together. And I'd be like, okay, this is a fierce one. This is a fierce competitor coming up. And then they would hit their first pose, and I would say, never mind. And posing can literally make or break your physique on stage. And people say it all the time. You can have the best physique in the show on stage. You can be the leanest, you can be the biggest, you can be the fullest, you could be the most balanced, symmetrical, everything. But if your posing sucks, you're not going to win. And depending on who else shows up, it may or may not be able to be overlooked, because sometimes judges can see through that and maybe they will make a decision one way or another. But usually the posing will make or break your physique, and you won't get awarded if you're not posing your own physique properly. So it's important to have a good eye on your posing that's not just you, so that you can accentuate your strengths and look as good as possible, and highlight those angles and those cuts and all of your strengths, and hide the weaknesses, like Christina said, because it really will make a difference. And once you go to a couple shows, you'll be able to tell who knows what they're doing up there and who doesn't. And it really makes a difference.
And that's why it also helps to go to a show, so you see how things are run. You understand prejudging, you understand call outs, you understand finals and what everything is being asked. Like, you might be asked to turn to the back, you might be asked to walk to the back, you might be asked to do quarter turns depending on what your division is. So knowing all that ahead of time really, really helps. But the other thing too, when Marissa was saying, you know, that girl was walking out and you're like, oh wow, this girl's got a great physique, or this guy's got a great physique, and then they hit their first pose, and you're like, ooh, well, the judges are going to do the same thing. They're going to probably turn and look at the next person who's standing in line to start judging and seeing what they're looking at. So you have like seconds to catch attention from the judges. So you want to just make sure that everything is on point and they have a reason to look at you in a good way.
Yeah. The next one that a lot of people make, and I'm going to skip ahead here because I really like this one, is not planning or thinking about after your show. So yeah, we just talked about everything leading up to a competition. But you know, you're gonna need a plan post show, because that is the most difficult period, and it is the easiest time to gain all of that weight back. And so we talked about how a lot of people will go into competing thinking that being stage lean is a solution to their weight loss, and that that's the end goal and that's what they want to maintain. You can't maintain stage lean. And when you finish a competition, you are essentially in a very sensitive position to where your body wants to gain body fat back. If you showed up on stage and you were lean enough, your body wants to gain body fat back, and fast. And so the best thing you can do for yourself is enjoy that night, enjoy the next day with all the food that you've been missing out on, and get back on a plan on Monday, and get back in the gym, and don't just quit after the show, because we do want to maintain this lifestyle, and we want to maintain a relatively leaner physique in general. That's, I think, desirable for anyone listening to this, but being stage lean is definitely not maintainable, and you need to have a plan to reverse diet. Again, we define that and we'll do a whole episode on it, but it's just slowly increasing your calories over time. And you need to have future goals. There's so much that goes into the post-show period that I don't think a lot of people talk about, but people can get depressed after shows because now they feel like they don't have purpose after working so hard for something, you know, especially if the show doesn't necessarily go as they planned. Maybe they didn't win like they thought they would, but you have to be able to set goals and have a plan post-show for both your diet and just your life and your future outside of competing. And you should have a coach that is ahead of you on this. They should be thinking about, how am I going to take care of my athlete after they compete? And if you have a coach that has no guidance for you post-show, and you know, you compete and they say, okay, see ya, you need to be looking for someone to take care of you during that time. It's the hardest time to stay accountable. It's the hardest time to stay on track. It's the easiest time to fall off the wagon. No one's going to handle it perfectly, but you can absolutely handle it better than just completely going off the reins and gaining all of the weight back and more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really difficult is your body is screaming for food, and you're like, well, I deserve it. I should be able to eat this. I should be able to, you know, and so you want to eat, but like Marissa said, your body is primed to store fat very, very quickly. So if you eat if you listen to your body and your hunger cues, that's just a recipe for disaster. So we talk about prep, and then prep ends, but you still kind of have a period of, like, I would say minimum 6 weeks where you still kind of are in prep, or you should at least treat it like prep. And, you know, maybe you're maybe 90% adherent as opposed to 100, 110, but you still need to be very, very, very careful post-show until you get to a decent point in prep. But kind of what Marissa was saying is, the other mistake is thinking stage lean is maintainable long term. Oh, if I just reverse diet, I can stay at this level of leanness at all times, and I'll just hover around 3 pounds over my stage weight. For a lot of people, it's not healthy and it's not maintainable.
For most people,
there are some people who I get very frustrated with, but they can maintain anywhere from like 3 to 5 pounds above their stage weight. But most of the time, for someone to be able to do that, it still takes a lot of sacrifice, and you really have to look into their habits. Like, there are some people, they get like on average like 20,000 steps a day just because they're super active people. And so maybe they just have like a higher metabolism, or a higher, set point than we do, than like most people. But for most folks out there, we cannot maintain that level of leanness for a long period of time. It's just not going to happen. So when you start to see yourself gain some weight back, people freak out. So again, that post show is really, really difficult.
Yeah. And I would say, I'm not going to put like a rough number on it, but depending on the person.
Yeah, that's hard.
You could maintain anywhere from 15 to 30 pounds above your stage weight, and that would be a healthy weight for you. I'll tell you right now, I'm weighing about 145 to 150. My last stage weight was 124. And so I am 20, 25 pounds above my stage weight. And here's the kicker. I wasn't lean enough at the national level. So I could have lost another 5 pounds. So roughly, 25, 30 pounds above stage weight is a really healthy and still relatively lean weight for me. So it depends on the person, but it really could be up to that. So your maintainable body fat percentage and leanness that you're at could be a wide range. And as long as you feel healthy, post show, gaining some fat back is a really good thing that everyone needs to do. You can't just sit there and be like, yeah, I'm going to maintain 8% body fat year round. Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Yeah, that's very difficult to do.
Yeah. So do you want to move on to some of the listener questions and hit those kind of rapid fire?
Yes. Yeah. So I actually just checked my Instagram and I got a couple more in, which is awesome. I'll touch on I got 2 questions on this. So when is my next show, and am I still competing this year? So the answer is yes, I am still planning on competing this year. So I just did Universe, which was November 13th. It was Friday the 13th. And I'm planning to do USA's in Vegas and potentially the Amateur Olympia, depending on the feedback that I get and what my coach says. So those are my next ones. And then that kind of goes into the next question, which was, what were the judges' feedback at your most recent show? So I actually am very fortunate. I did get feedback from one of the judges, and it is kind of already what we know. I knew I was going to get this feedback. I'm waiting on one more judge. I'm waiting on Sandy to hear her response. And I'm also hoping I can get some more feedback regarding my stage presence, as far as my posing, my hair, my makeup, my tan, things like that. But as far as my physique, it was more upper body development to match my lower body. So shoulders and just general development in the upper body. A bit tighter conditioning, and continue to round out my glutes. So that is feedback I get consistently from each judging panel, and it's usually conditioning in the lower body, but as of right now, I know I just need to be more conditioned and tighter overall. So that is my feedback. And then I'll just do one more since it was directed at me and for shows. It's what is your get ready routine for show day, and you do your own makeup, correct? Yes, that is correct. So my get ready routine is I generally try to sleep in as late as possible. I know a lot of people get up at like the crack of dawn. That's not me. I like to get as much sleep as I possibly can. If I am not able to use the bathroom, I will have some coffee. to make sure I get everything moving in the right direction. I will go on a 10-minute walk per my coach's recommendation, and I start eating my first meal. My first meal this year that I've really liked is cream of rice, berries, and peanut butter with a little bit of protein powder. And then I will get ready. So I typically start with my makeup first and then do my hair. And I will also typically, well, actually, before I start doing hair and makeup, I will do my last and final coat of tan. So I do DIY Pro Tan, and I will do a combination of the overnight coat and the top coat. And so I'll do that. And then while that's kind of drying off, I'll start with my makeup. I do my own makeup, and then I do my hair, and then I do my final check-in pictures for my coach, or I'll meet up with my coach. But that's pretty much show day and just doing extra posing before I get backstage.
Yeah. And if you have hair and makeup appointments or tanning appointments, your morning's kind of be dictated for you based on when those are. So personally, I don't do my own hair or makeup. Sometimes I'll do my own hair if I'm just straightening it, but I will have makeup appointment, tan appointment, because I'm lazy and I like paying for convenience. So especially
I'm all about saving money.
So on show day, like, I'm the type where it's worth it to me to splurge. So my morning will be dictated by those appointments.
Yeah. So sometimes, like, you literally could have your makeup appointment at 3 a.m. It just depends on, like, if you're doing a regional show, probably not. But if you're doing a national level show there, it's just whenever they can fit you in. So you could have makeup at 3 and then your hair at like 11. So it really just depends. And some people, like Marissa, she would rather pay for that convenience and not have to worry about doing it herself. And that's going to bring her anxiety level down. Whereas for me, on the flip side, I don't like having appointments on show day, and that stresses me out because I don't like being late to things or if something comes up. So I love being on my own schedule and taking things into my own hands. So it really just, you have to assess who you are as a person and figure out what's going to help bring your anxiety levels down.
Yeah, because you'll be super nervous all day.
Yeah. Yeah. So Marissa, why don't you touch on a question? Do you have to do fasted cardio?
So I actually got another question in that's not written down. So I'm going to touch on that one first because it's pretty quick.
Okay.
It's what is the proper water loss protocol in the final week, parentheses, weeks before the show? Typically, most coaches at this point have dialed back on the extremity to which they are using water manipulation. Typically, through peak week, which is the week before the show, you will keep your water constant and relatively high. Some people might add water to that week before the show, and then it's just the day before. Usually you'll cut that in half or just cut it off early. Is typically what coaches will do, but again, it's very individualized on what your normal hydration is like, and your coach should have that kind of communication with you of what your normal hydration is like and how do we manipulate that. So typically nowadays we don't see a ton of competitors doing water cuts or water manipulation. You should just be lean enough to not have to do that. Fasted cardio before for prep, you do not have to do fasted cardio. There's no research to show that fasted cardio is superior to regular fed cardio. It's been shown in research that fat oxidation rates are higher during fasted cardio than in fed cardio, but that's because your body's in a fasted state, so there's no like food going through your bloodstream being burned. And it has also been shown that in a 24-hour period, the fat oxidation rates that are higher during your fasted cardio balance out throughout the rest of the day. So you're actually not burning any extra energy or burning any extra fat throughout that 24-hour period. So is it beneficial acutely? Yes, the rates of fat oxidation are higher, but fat oxidation is not the same as total body fat loss. And that energy expenditure basically evens itself out throughout the day to give you a nice little sciencey answer. But might touch on that.
Yeah, I would just say you don't have to do fasted cardio, but if it fits within your schedule and that's the best thing that's going to work for you, then do it.
Yeah. I will say right now, when I'm doing a ton of cardio, I'm absolutely doing it fasted because I don't want to waste food before I get that done. And that's just
Yeah.
kind of the mindset that a lot of competitors adopt, which is why it becomes kind of a prevalent thing that we see. But there are hardcore believers in fasted cardio that are ignorant to the evidence. But, you
Mm-hmm.
know, ultimately, that's kind of what it comes down to.
It's just your preference. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the hardest aspect of competing that both of you experienced?
So I don't think it was the sacrifice of training or cardio or diet for me. I can get very robotic with those things, and it's just not really something that I question or suffer with. But I really think it's just the isolation and the loneliness that you get from doing it all on your own, and it's very mentally challenging to just continue on with that, even if it's, you know, making it more difficult for you to engage with others and picking into your social life and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I think it's really that it's the social and interpersonal sacrifices more so than the physical sacrifices themselves.
For me, I don't think it was actually competing itself, but more of the post show. That is really difficult no matter how frequently you've competed. Post show is just always difficult, and there are different things that you're going to experience each time, each prep. Again, I would say that that's something that I didn't really think about. I thought I had a very healthy mindset going into post show, and post show happened, and it showed me that I didn't have the control that I thought I did. So it's just different. You are just so disciplined when you're in prep, and then something like that switch turns off, and it's hard. So I would say that each off season, I get a little bit better, but it's still really tough.
Oh yeah, it's definitely that's probably like my number two. It's just
Yeah,
it's a very hard transition for like a good 12 to 16 weeks after your show to learn how to live again in a
yeah.
balanced way.
Next question. There are so many coaches out there. How do you go about picking one?
So we kind of talked about this a little bit, but you know, you want to interview people, you want to do your research, you want to look around. There's going to be big name coaches. There's going to be local small coaches. Neither is better or worse. You really just need to find someone that you connect well with and you feel like you
Mm-hmm.
can be open with, and someone who gives you that sense of confidence, because, you know, it's not someone who's going to say, because I told you so. It's not someone who's going to be shady about the supplements that they're giving you, but it's going to be someone who tells you, you know, why you're doing what you're doing, why they think it's the right way to go. They're going to engage you in conversations to make decisions together and not just make decisions for you. But when the time comes and you're not in a place where you should be making the decision, they're going to take the reins. So, you know, it really, you just have to, you might go through multiple coaches too. I mean, both Christina and I have worked with multiple coaches through
Mm-hmm.
multiple seasons. So, you know, it's really just going to be a matter of seeing who you gel with, and maybe it won't work out after 6 months or a year, or maybe you'll even be with that person for 2 years
Mm-hmm.
or longer. And then eventually you both grow as people and maybe you don't align anymore. So it's just about figuring out someone whose values at the core align with yours.
Yeah. And I think it's important to be open and honest with your coach. And, like we mentioned, doing your research and interviewing, making sure that their philosophies align with yours, and having a good relationship and feel like you can have that line of communication open. And so the best coach isn't necessarily the one who has the largest following on social media. You can have someone who's a great coach who's got 500 followers, who's just a local coach. But if that's who works the best for you, then that is the best coach for you. And again, you might have different phases of your life. Like my first, few coaches were great for me at the time. Would they be great for me now? Probably not. That doesn't take away for who they are as coaches. It's just a matter of, like, I don't know, time and place lining up, and where you are in your life and where you are in your competing journey.
Yeah, definitely. Next question, who gets to decide what the winning physique looks like across federations? So there's going to be a judging panel, and it's usually, some higher ups within that federation, within that organization. And the judging panel will be usually pretty regionally based for some of the smaller shows. So regional level, they'll have a panel of judges, whether it's a bunch of different people who are involved in the administration of the organization, but they've either had experience competing themselves or judging experience, and they all come together and they develop a standard. At the highest level of the organization, they develop a standard for each division that they're looking for. And then regionally, that can differ a little bit here and there, just depending on the types of athletes that come to those shows. And ultimately, the panel is going to decide who has the winning physique based on who shows up that day. So usually it's about comparing apples to apples. So if you're an orange in a batch of apples, even though you might have the best physique from an objective standpoint, if you just look so different from everyone else in a way that doesn't stand out in a good way, then, they might not pick you that day at that show.
But if you compete against other oranges, then you might stand out.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing I'd like to point out is sometimes federations will go back and reevaluate the standards and what the criteria is that they're looking for. So with wellness being brought in to the NPC, they've kind of had to adjust a little bit, I would say, of their standard, and they're still kind of shaping that criteria and what they're looking for. But if they ever feel like, sometimes you'll have like the creep, which is the jump from regional to a national level, from the national level to the show level. And everyone is looking at stage shots, and people typically look bigger and larger in their stage shots. So people look to those and say, that's what I need to look like. So sometimes what you'll have happen is competitors look bigger and bigger and bigger and more muscular and more muscular. And for bikini, they're looking like they're starting to go for a little bit more shape and not as conditioned and not as hard. And that's not always the case, but that has been what they are kind of telling us as competitors. So sometimes they do need to reshape the division and bring it back to what they originally were looking for. So I would say that while it is pretty standard across the board, they will reevaluate from time to time if need be.
Oh yeah, and the standards in 2011 are completely different than what competitors look like now in 2020. So the divisions also evolve over time.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, a last question from our Instagram poll, and then we will close this up. So which do you like the best, prep, show day, or post-show? You want to take it?
Sure. So for me, I love the journey of getting to stage. I don't love being on stage, which is ironic. I just have a lot of anxiety. But I would say that my favorite is show day, because I love just like the team aspect and being around all your friends. And it's the day that you kind of get to relax a little bit. All the work is done. I don't know, doing my makeup sometimes is a little bit like therapeutic, but I love being there because I'm normally with like my mom or my dad or like my husband. So I love that experience. My favorite, actually one of my very favorite shows was in 2016. I did the East Coast Classic, and Marissa was there, and my friend Kristen was there, and my mom was there, my dad came, my husband was there, my other friend, and it was just so much fun because I loved seeing everyone come together. And it wasn't necessarily that they were there for me, but I just loved being with all of my friends and family. And having something to bring us together in that sense. So that's why I like show day. And of course, I get to eat, but it's mostly like the friends and family aspect.
Yeah, I will say my favorite part of the whole process has got to be the process itself. I really just, I'd resonate and thrive in that environment of just constantly exercising discipline and learning something new about yourself every day. And when we go on these long rants of, here's what you should know before you start competing, to kind of bring it full circle, it sounds awful for the most part.
Yeah.
And you're like, why the heck would you ever do this? But I have to hit home the point before we close this episode out that the process is so rewarding day in and day out. Even if it's a little miserable throughout or you are suffering, there is just so much beauty in the self-discovery that comes along with accomplishing tasks day to day that you never thought you'd be able to do. I remember in the depths of my last prep, and my cardio was so high and my food was so low. Every time I just finished a day of living, I was like, hell yeah, I did it. And I did not know that I could do this for this many days in a row. And, at that point, it was really just taking it one moment, one day at a time. But that adds up.
Yeah.
And soon I was 30 weeks into prep and I had finished my season and I was like, wow, I can't believe I just actually did that. So yeah, it's definitely got to be the process for me. And if you are thinking about competing, if you have all of these other things into account, it is absolutely worthwhile and you're going to get a lot out of it.
Yeah. And you might experience some hardships, but I mean, it really is such a learning experience and you learn so much about who you are and what you're capable of achieving, and health and fitness just becomes a natural part of your lifestyle, and you just come to realize that you can do anything that you put your mind to as long as you are willing to put in that work and work hard day in and day out. And it's just so it's so rewarding, and people can see the dedication and all of the hard work that you brought to the stage, and you get to showcase that and do things that not a lot of people are willing to do. So I mean, like, I think if you are just in a good spot, like, why not give it a shot? And if you hate it, you hate it. And now, but at least and you're not going to look back at your life and regret at least not trying. So I just say, step on stage. Like, who cares? If you hate it, you hate it. And if you love it, well, now you've found a new passion.
Yeah. All right, Christina, do you want to do your thing and
Yes.
close us out of this episode today?
Yeah, that was a long one.
I'm like winded.
I know. Well, today, I got to go to the gym too. But today we talked about our experiences with competing. We talked about different aspects to consider if you are thinking about it. We talked about the mistakes that we see competitors make or mistakes that we've made in the past. And then we did a little Q&A. So we really hope that you guys enjoyed this podcast. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. And we'd appreciate it if you could leave us a review and a rating. If you think it was helpful or you think it could be helpful to someone else, please share this episode with a friend and family member. And you can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Christy Lynn Fit and Marissa at Marissa Roy Fitness. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we hope to see you back next week.
See ya.
Bye.